The night over Nigeria's northeast was quiet, but it was not peaceful. In villages near the Mandera Mountains, families slept lightly, used to the distant echoes of danger, used to the fear that comes after sunset. Somewhere beyond the homes and dirt roads, men moved under the cover of darkness, convinced, as they had been before, that night would protect them. They believed the shadows belonged to them. They were wrong. In the early hours of December 18th, while most Nigerians were still asleep, troops on the front lines were already alert. Sensors picked up movement in terrain that has seen too much blood and too many broken promises. This was not a coincidence. It was a calculated infiltration attempt, planned, deliberate, and confident. The kind of move insurgents make when they believe momentum is on their side. But this time the story turned. Instead of rushing in, soldiers waited. They watched. They allowed the advance to continue into a carefully chosen engagement zone. And then, with precision and discipline, the response came swift, coordinated, and decisive. Ground forces struck first. When the attackers tried to retreat, air power sealed the escape routes. By dawn, the night no longer belonged to those who came to terrorize. Several fighters lay dead. A key commander was neutralized. Weapons, radios, and even recording equipment were left behind, silent proof of a mission that was supposed to be filmed as a victory. On the surface, this looks like a clear military success. An infiltration was stopped. A command structure was damaged. Lives in nearby communities were likely spared. For families who have lived with fear for years, even temporary relief matters. For soldiers, it was another night survived, another mission completed in a war that rarely pauses. But this moment forces us to ask harder questions. What does a victory like this really mean beyond the battlefield? If commanders are eliminated, yet new fighters keep emerging, are these operations enough? Can military success alone bring lasting peace to a nation struggling with insecurity, economic hardship, and deep social wounds? And most importantly, do these victories translate into real safety for ordinary people when the sun rises? If you value thoughtful, balanced analysis, not just headlines, please like this video and subscribe. Share your honest thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Nigeria is finally turning a corner, or are we still trapped in a cycle that refuses to end? I want to hear from you. The operation began shortly after midnight. There were no sirens, no public announcements, no dramatic warnings, just quiet signals moving across screens and radios as surveillance systems detected unusual movement along the Mandera Mountain axis, an area that soldiers know all too well. This terrain is not forgiving. It is rocky, elevated, difficult to navigate, and has been exploited repeatedly by insurgent groups who believe its complexity offers protection and concealment. This time, the movement was different. It was deliberate, calculated. Military sources described it as a clear infiltration attempt, fighters advancing with purpose, not wandering, not scouting, but moving with confidence toward Borno State. The kind of confidence that comes from past successes, from believing the state will once again be slow to react. But reaction was already underway. While most Nigerians slept, troops were fully alert. Intelligence feeds were cross-checked. Patterns were analyzed. Commanders made a critical decision: do not rush. In counterinsurgency, impatience can be deadly. Instead of charging into uncertain terrain, ground forces held their positions and allowed the advancing fighters to move deeper into what was later described as a carefully calculated engagement zone. This moment matters. It speaks to discipline, it speaks to restraint, and it reflects a shift from reactive defense to controlled, intelligence-led operations. The soldiers on the ground understood the risk. Letting the enemy advance means trusting the plan, trusting coordination, and trusting each other. When the engagement finally began, it was swift and overwhelming. Ground forces struck first, breaking the formation of the infiltrating fighters. The exchange was intense but brief. Several insurgents were killed on the spot. Among them was a high-value individual, a key commander whose role extended beyond the battlefield into planning, coordination, and morale. One detail stood out sharply. Alongside this commander was a cameraman reportedly documenting the operation. That single fact reveals volumes about the mindset of the attackers. They did not come expecting resistance. They came expecting victory. They believed they would record another successful incursion, another propaganda clip to inspire recruits and intimidate communities. Instead, the camera fell silent. As the remaining fighters attempted to retreat under pressure, the second phase of the operation unfolded. The air component moved in quickly and decisively. Precision airstrikes targeted known escape routes and retreating elements, effectively sealing off avenues of withdrawal. This was not indiscriminate bombing. These were controlled strikes designed to prevent regrouping, to dismantle cohesion, and to ensure that the engagement ended there, not kilometers away in another village, another ambush, another tragedy. By the time the firing stopped, the outcome was clear. The infiltration attempt had failed completely, but the operation did not end with the last strike. Follow-up exploitation of the area revealed the scale of disruption inflicted. Troops recovered AK-47 rifles, PKT machine guns, loaded magazines, handheld radios, mobile phones, and a camcorder. Motorcycles and bicycles used for logistics, mobility, and supply were seized or destroyed. These were not symbolic trophies. They were functional assets essential to movement, communication, and survival in hostile terrain. Perhaps most telling were the signs left behind. Blood trails winding through the rocks, shallow graves hastily dug, indicators that casualties extended beyond those immediately confirmed during the exchange. In conflicts like this, not all losses are counted at dawn. Some are carried away in silence. From a strictly military standpoint, this operation followed the textbook: surveillance, patience, controlled engagement, coordinated ground and air action, denial of escape, exploitation. The immediate threat was neutralized, plans were disrupted, command structures were weakened. Yet even here, beneath the precision and professionalism, the reality of the war remains stark. This was one night, one operation, one battle in a conflict that has stretched across years and across generations. And as effective as this action was, it raises a question that cannot be avoided. How many more nights like this will be required before security is no longer measured in temporary victories, but in lasting peace? The climax of this operation did not come with a long, drawn-out battle. It arrived suddenly when expectation collided with reality. The insurgents had advanced believing they were unseen, believing the terrain and the darkness still worked in their favor. But when the engagement zone closed around them, that belief collapsed in seconds. What followed was not chaos, but control. As ground forces engaged, the structure of the infiltrating unit broke apart. Several fighters were killed immediately. Then came the moment that changed the meaning of the entire operation: the neutralization of a key commander. This was not just another armed man on the battlefield. This was a figure involved in planning, coordination, and psychological influence, someone whose presence gave direction and confidence to others. And beside him was something even more revealing: a cameraman. That detail deserves attention because it tells us exactly how the attackers viewed this mission. They did not come expecting a fight. They came expecting a narrative, a recorded victory that could be packaged and distributed as proof of strength. In modern insurgency, the camera is as important as the gun. Images recruit. Images intimidate. Images keep movements alive even after losses. But the footage they expected to capture never existed. The camera became evidence, not propaganda. As the remaining fighters attempted to pull back, panic replaced confidence. This was the second critical phase, the moment when many operations fail. Retreat is when insurgents often escape, regroup, and strike again elsewhere. But this time, retreat was anticipated. The air component moved swiftly, targeting known escape routes with precision strikes designed to cut off movement and deny regrouping. There was no dramatic chase, no prolonged pursuit, just calculated force applied at the right moment. From a tactical standpoint, this is where the operation crossed from success into disruption. Not only were fighters eliminated, but options were removed. Command links were severed, mobility was neutralized. What could have become another cycle of hit-and-run violence ended in the same area where it began. The immediate reaction from military sources was clear. This was a decisive blow to the group's fighting capability. Morale among troops, we are told, remains high, and that matters. In a long war, morale is currency. Soldiers who believe their actions have impact fight differently from those who feel trapped in endless repetition. But reactions do not come from one direction. For communities near Borno State and surrounding areas, news of the operation likely brought relief, quiet relief, cautious relief. The kind that comes from knowing a threat was stopped before it reached homes, markets, and schools. For people who have lived through years of displacement, abductions, and loss, even a single prevented attack matters deeply. For supporters of the military, this operation reinforces a growing belief that momentum may be shifting. That intelligence is improving, that coordination is sharper, that the state is no longer always reacting, but sometimes anticipating. Critics, however, see the same events through a different lens. They acknowledge the professionalism of the operation, but ask why such victories have not yet translated into an end to the conflict. Commanders are eliminated, yet new leaders emerge. Camps are struck, yet recruitment continues. From this perspective, each success is real but incomplete. And then there is the human reaction that rarely fits neatly into policy discussions. On the other side of the battlefield are families who will receive news that a son, a brother, or a husband will not return. This does not excuse terrorism, but it reminds us that conflict creates ripples far beyond the point of impact. Every clash leaves behind grief, sometimes visible, sometimes hidden. This is where the climax of the story expands beyond gunfire. Because what happened in the Mandera Mountains is not just about who won a tactical engagement, it is about perception, confidence shattered on one side, cautious hope rising on another, doubt lingering everywhere in between. The operation proved that infiltration is no longer guaranteed, that darkness is no longer protection. But it also exposed the fragile balance Nigeria continues to live with, where victories inspire belief, yet belief is constantly tested by the persistence of violence. And that tension between progress and persistence is where the real reaction begins. When the gunfire fades and the helicopters pull away, the real consequences of an operation like this begin to surface not on the battlefield, but in the lives of ordinary people and in the calculations of those who govern. The clash in the Mandera Mountains may have ended in a military victory, but its effects reach far beyond the rocks and escape routes where it unfolded. For civilians in Borno State and surrounding communities, the immediate consequence is psychological. The knowledge that an infiltration attempt was stopped before it reached populated areas matters deeply. In regions that have endured years of trauma, abductions, killings, burned villages, and displacement, security is not an abstract concept. It is the difference between sending children to school or keeping them hidden indoors. It is the difference between planting crops or abandoning farmland out of fear. This operation likely offered a moment of relief, not celebration, relief, the quiet kind that comes from surviving another threat. Yet that relief is fragile. Many residents know from experience that today's safety does not guarantee tomorrow's peace. Security for them is measured not in press statements, but in uninterrupted days and nights. Politically, the implications are more complex. The Nigerian constitution places the protection of lives and property as the primary responsibility of the state. In recent years, that responsibility has been openly questioned. Communities ravaged by terrorism and banditry have often felt abandoned, unheard, or inadequately protected. Every successful operation therefore becomes more than a military update, it becomes a test of state credibility. This is why victories like this carry political weight. They are used as evidence that the state is reasserting control over sovereign territory, that it is still capable of defending its citizens, that institutions, though strained, are functioning. For a government facing widespread anxiety over insecurity, such moments matter. Yet contradictions remain impossible to ignore. While victories are announced, insecurity persists. While commanders are neutralized, recruitment continues. While operations succeed in one location, violence flares elsewhere. This tension creates a credibility gap between what is said and what people experience daily. For citizens living under constant threat, repeated assurances without lasting change can deepen skepticism rather than restore trust. There is also the question of sustainability. Military operations demand resources, funding, equipment, intelligence, and human endurance. Soldiers cannot remain on permanent high alert without consequences. Families of service members carry the burden of long deployments. Communities near conflict zones live with militarization as a constant presence. These realities shape public perception in ways that statistics cannot. At the political level, operations like this are often cited in debates over security funding, military welfare, and defense reforms. Supporters argue that sustained offensive pressure is necessary to deny terrorists freedom of movement and operational space. Critics counter that force alone cannot resolve conflicts rooted in poverty, marginalization, and governance failures. Both arguments find support in Nigeria's lived experience. The civilian impact also extends into national psychology. Insecurity has become one of the dominant anxieties of daily life across the country. From the northeast to the northwest, from rural communities to major highways, fear has reshaped behavior. Farmers abandon land. Traders avoid roads. Young people grow up surrounded by violence and uncertainty, their futures narrowed by instability. In this environment, each successful operation sends a signal not just to insurgents, but to the population. It says the state is still fighting, still pushing back, still refusing to surrender territory. But it also raises a question that grows louder with every passing year. When do these victories stop being temporary pauses and start becoming a permanent turning point? The answer to that question will determine whether operations like the one in the Mandera Mountains are remembered as milestones on the path to peace or as brief moments of order in a conflict that never truly ended. When an operation like this unfolds in Nigeria's northeast, its significance does not stop at national borders. For the United States and the wider international community, what happens in places like the Mandera Mountain axis is closely watched not only for what it says about Nigeria's internal security, but for what it reveals about regional stability, counterterrorism strategy, and the future of fragile states under pressure. From a U.S. perspective, Nigeria occupies a critical position. It is Africa's most populous country, one of its largest economies, and a central pillar in West African security architecture. Instability in Nigeria does not remain local. It spills across borders, disrupts trade routes, fuels migration pressures, and creates openings for transnational extremist networks. For American policymakers, this makes every counterterrorism operation more than a domestic Nigerian affair. It becomes a data point in a much larger equation. Operations like the one in the Mandera Mountains signal capability. Advanced surveillance, coordinated ground tactics, and precision airstrikes align with doctrines long emphasized by Western military planners. To observers in Washington and allied capitals, this suggests progress toward professionalized, intelligence-driven counterinsurgency, an approach the U.S. has supported globally through training advisory roles and strategic partnerships. But capability alone is never the full story. American analysts are also deeply aware of historical patterns. In Iraq, Afghanistan, and other conflict zones, tactical victories often failed to translate into long-term stability. Insurgent leaders were eliminated. Camps were destroyed. Yet grievances persisted, recruitment continued, and violence adapted. These lessons shape how U.S. officials interpret Nigeria's battlefield successes with cautious optimism rather than celebration. There is also the regional dimension. The Mandera Mountain axis and surrounding border areas highlight a persistent challenge: porous frontiers and uneven regional coordination. Insurgent groups move across national lines, exploiting gaps in intelligence sharing and enforcement. From a global security standpoint, a victory in one location must be reinforced by cooperation among neighboring states, or the threat simply relocates. This is a concern not only for Nigeria, but for the entire Sahel and West African corridor. International partners also view operations like this through a governance lens. Military pressure can suppress violence, but lasting peace requires parallel investments in civilian protection, economic opportunity, and institutional trust. For donor countries and multilateral organizations, this raises difficult questions. How much emphasis should be placed on security assistance versus development aid? How can support avoid reinforcing cycles of militarization without addressing root causes? Public opinion in the West adds another layer. Images of airstrikes and armed patrols can reassure audiences concerned about global terrorism, but they can also raise concerns about civilian impact, human rights, and transparency. These tensions shape diplomatic relationships, funding decisions, and media narratives. For Nigeria, this global scrutiny is both an opportunity and a burden. Successful operations strengthen its position as a security partner. They demonstrate resolve and competence. Yet, they also invite comparison against global examples where military success failed to end conflict. From the world's vantage point, the question is not whether Nigeria can fight terrorism. This operation shows that it can. The deeper question is whether these efforts can be integrated into a broader strategy that reduces the conditions under which extremism thrives. Because for the United States and the international community, the stakes are clear. A stable Nigeria strengthens regional security. A trapped Nigeria locked in cycles of attack and response creates risks that extend far beyond its borders. And that is why moments like this are watched so closely, not for what they end, but for what they might begin. As we reflect on what happened in the Mandera Mountains, one truth stands out clearly: the fight against terrorism is not decided in a single night, no matter how decisive that night may appear. The operation stopped an infiltration. It neutralized a commander. It disrupted plans that could have brought devastation to civilian communities. These are real outcomes earned at real risk by real people, but they are not an ending. They are a pause. History both in Nigeria and around the world teaches us that terrorism rarely collapses from force alone. It adapts, it waits, it shifts terrain and tactics. When military pressure increases in one area, violence often resurfaces elsewhere, reshaped but familiar. This is not a failure of soldiers. It is the nature of conflicts rooted in deep structural problems. That is where the warning lies. If victories like this are not followed by sustained efforts to rebuild communities, restore livelihoods, and renew trust between citizens and the state, they risk becoming isolated moments rather than lasting change. Displaced families must return home safely. Young people must see futures beyond violence. Roads, schools, and farms must become symbols of stability, not targets of fear. Without this broader vision, the battlefield will continue to reset itself again and again. There is also a political warning embedded here. Public confidence cannot survive on announcements alone. People measure security in days without fear, not in headlines. If expectations rise faster than results, frustration follows. And frustration is the space where extremist narratives find new life. Governments that win battles but lose trust face a different kind of vulnerability, one that no airstrike can fix. Yet despite all this, there is still room for cautious hope. Operations like this demonstrate capacity. They show that infiltration is no longer guaranteed, that coordination has improved, that the state is capable of acting decisively. They send a message to insurgents, to communities, and to the world that surrender is not an option. That message matters. The challenge now is to ensure that military action becomes a foundation, not a substitute. A foundation for governance that reaches forgotten regions, for economic policies that include rather than exclude, for justice systems that protect rather than alienate. Only then can tactical success evolve into strategic peace. So the question returns to you, the viewer, not as a slogan, but as a genuine reflection. Do you believe Nigeria is finally turning a corner in its long fight against terrorism? Or are we still witnessing another chapter in a cycle that is yet to be broken? Your perspective matters. Share your thoughts in the comments. Engage respectfully. If you value analysis that looks beyond the battlefield into the human, political, and global dimensions of security, please like this video and subscribe. Because the future of peace is not shaped only by those who fight at night, but by those who think, question, and demand better when morning comes.